Hey guys, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my reaction to the launch of FPL and the full set of prices being released and effectively my Game Week 1 first draft as a result of that. In my opinion, because of the way pricing has gone, we only have effectively 4 premiums in the game. That for me is Haaland, Kane, Salah, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. And the way things will go this season, in my opinion, is that we're probably only going to be able to afford a 2 meme structure or at least a 1 meme structure because the way pricing has gone for players outside of these premiums is that players like a Bruno Fernandes or a Son or even a De Bruyne, for example, have been reduced so much in price compared to previous years that you now can actually create a super well-rounded squad only comprising really of top 6 or even top 8 teams. And unfortunately, that seems to allow for us to create a starting 11 or even a starting 12 of players from these teams, and therefore the bench will only really consist of players who are 4.0 or 4.5 starting options, which we've actually been given a plentiful amount of. So for example, in the defensive positions, we have some starting 4.0 defenders in Luton within Bell and also with Bayer in Burnley. So that is sort of the landscape of FPL this season. Pricing has dramatically changed things, and as a result, I do think the best structure so far is going to be either 3-4-3 template or 3-5-2. My personal preference is to go for a 3-5-2. The reason why I say this is because with the 3-4-3 template, as things stand, your only really real option, in my opinion, is to actually go for someone like a Darwin as a third 7.5, or to actually downgrade a little bit in price and actually go for someone more of a budget forward quality, such as a Morris from Luton, or looking at Dominic Calvert-Lewin's price ahead of the FPL anticipated launch. You've got him at 6.0 as well. So that's kind of the landscape, but you'll only be rotating between those sorts of players. And I do think that the forwards are much more expensive than some of the midfield options that have been astoundingly good, particularly at that sort of 6.5 range, which I'll be talking about in a second. As far as my defense right here, you can see that I've added Flecken at 4.5. He is my anticipated Brentford starting keeper. Now, of course, Raya is still at the time of recording of this video, still at Brentford, so he could, of course, start Game Week 1, at which point we probably wouldn't consider Flecken. The alternative options are going to be someone like Leno at 4.5 or even Pickford at 4.5 as well, because I do think Fulham and Everton have pretty similarly matched fixtures to start the season, and there's no real reason to actually go any more than 4.5 in my opinion, unless let's say you wanted to drop Trent Alexander-Arnold and actually have a very well-rounded team and go full on 1 meme template, and that maybe will actually allow you to go for a little bit more of an expensive keeper, someone like an Emi Martinez, for example, or even stretch that towards a 5.5 if you really want to go maybe let's say cover Trent with Allison potentially, even though I don't think that that's as advisable as it looks. As far as Trent Alexander-Arnold, the reason why I'm going for him here is simply because as of right now, I am not going to go with Salah in Game Week 1, and that does allow me a little bit more budget flexibility because all the other midfield options are much cheaper and also provide seemingly good amount of value to cover Salah for. Trent is in some way also a coverage of Liverpool, and we know with the new role that he has in the system, particularly when he's on the ball and playing within the midfield positions, that Trent has exquisite expected assist stats. We talked about that within the early sort of price reactions in the previous day, and simply at 8.0 I still think Trent is an absolute great option to keep. And because Liverpool have such a great run of games, I do anticipate with the stronger midfield this season that they will also find it a little bit easier to get the clean sheets that they were so desperately lacking in the prior year. As far as Gabriel, I just think his price is astounding. Ben White is at 5.5 this season, whereas Gabriel, someone who's been consistently great for the last 2 years, is now at 5.0. And realistically, you're looking at someone who's absolutely nailed within this Arsenal team, and someone that I think will be once again a set piece threat, because we saw over the course of the year that he actually was more of a set piece threat than someone like Saliba. So at that point, Gabriel just seems like an astounding pick, particularly given Ramsdale's pricing as well. So there's no reason, in my opinion, to actually go for someone like Ramsdale when you have Gabriel with added go threat at similar pricing. Estupiñán at 5.0 I think is also absurdly good. Now, Brighton also got a new goalkeeper, so we might actually see Brighton continue to rotate goalkeepers as we saw in the prior year when Sanchez was benched. And then eventually dropped for someone like Steele, who of course was a super great option at 4.0 last season. But right now we have their new Dutch keeper being priced at 4.5, so it's going to be interesting to see whether we want to go for Brighton. But I think because Estupiñán has so much added threat, I was someone who actually didn't own him towards the back half of last season, and he was incredible. in certain games. And his attacking output is just fantastic. And particularly if you wanted to, let's say, cover a little bit more of that Brighton attack, if you were going to sidestep them for whatever reason this season, then you could look towards getting Estupiñán, who I think gives you a bit of a balance of getting a good share of a top team and their defender, and also at least their most attacking defender. Shaw, of course, is a great option, and even James and Chilwell are too. I mean, you might have noticed as well in my fixture video that I mentioned that Chelsea actually have really good fixtures to start the season. But one thing I do think that is quite essential is that they will change structurally quite a bit in the defensive shape. So Chelsea might need a little bit of time early on in the season to adjust. And of course, they will be playing Liverpool in game week 1. So I don't think Chelsea is immediately pressing to start the season, but clearly you can see within the structure here that I only have 2 5.0 players. So maybe if you really wanted to go for a 5.5, you would actually have much more added flexibility, because that would allow you to move between options like Shaw, James, and Chilwell. As far as the midfield positions, what I've actually opted to go for is Saka, Martinelli, Fernandes, Mbeumo, and Foden. The most interesting option is probably going to be the budget option in terms of Mbeumo, and the question is going to be, why not go for someone like Enciso, or go for someone like March, Gross, or even Mitoma from this Brighton team that were fantastic in the previous year. And in my opinion, actually, what I would say is that Mbeumo actually had very similar underlying stats to both March and Mitoma. And actually, the biggest thing about Mbeumo this season is he probably is going to be the penalty taker for this Brentford team that actually have a better opening run of fixtures than Brighton. Now, of course, in game week 1, Brighton have a fantastic fixture. They're going to be playing versus Luton at home. But beyond that, I do think that Brentford's general run is better. And if you get the chance to go for someone like Mbeumo, then you've got incredible value. I mean, look at how Tony was priced this season. He was actually priced at someone at 8.0, right, as a forward after the fantastic season he had as the sort of Brentford striker. Now, of course, Mbeumo will probably play a similar role, and maybe there will be rotating forwards that will actually take the place assumed of Tony until he returns from his suspension in January. But for now, Mbeumo being a penalty option, someone who actually gets clean sheet points from this Brentford team, and someone who can also just simply grow within the more advanced, more pivotal role that he has in the system now that Tony is out, just seems like a better punt than someone from Brighton who we know share a lot of the goal threat between their sort of leading 4 to 5 players within the attack. As far as Foden, he's going to be one of my biggest punts here in the midfield. I do absolutely love Foden because of the Kevin De Bruyne injury. Him needing some time to recover will actually mean that Foden will probably get to play in that midfield position, because if we remember in the Champions League final, and then also a couple of games before the end of the season, that instead of actually using Julian Alvarez as a like-for-like substitute for KDB, we actually saw that in the key games, right? So when, let's say, titles were on the line, when competitions were on the line, that Foden was actually the replacement for KDB in those situations, as opposed to early in the season when it was Julian Alvarez. On top of that, too, we might have some players like Bernardo Silva or even Mahrez move towards the Saudi League, which definitely opens up the opportunity for Foden to play within that right-wing position. And ultimately, I do think Foden will get very, very consistent minutes and consistent starts to start the season. So I do think Foden is a worthy punt. If you don't want to go for Foden, I definitely think that you can just simply sidestep him by going for Maddison, maybe even actually downgrading Foden into someone like Sterling as well. And I'll talk about some alternative options later. But there you have it. Foden's going to be one of my key options. And of course, if you downgrade Foden to someone like Sterling, you're also opened up to moving Fernandes into, let's say, someone like a Marcus Rashford at 9.0. The big thing about Fernandes, of course, is he's going to be the penalty taker. And if you actually think that the level of the offense for United will improve, let's say if they get Rasmus Højlund from Atalanta and actually improve their attack and actually move away from players like Weghorst and Martial, then you can actually argue that Fernandes was very, very hard done by with the really poor quality level of finishing that United had in the previous year. And his expected assist numbers were pretty much very close to KDB. And him being that high suggests that when they have more capable strikers and finishers in that team, alongside Rashford, who is probably the only key performer for United from a goal-scoring perspective, that Fernandes will actually be an even better option this year, considering that he has penalties. So I do think Fernandes is an option to definitely go for ahead of Rashford, who actually ended up with more points than him, and also higher XG, of course, but with a huge drop-off in XA in comparison. As far as Martinelli and Saka, these are two options that I think are absolutely nailed in my team. Martinelli less so, because I do think you can actually genuinely think about Havertz if you wanted to downgrade in price once again, or you can actually upgrade towards Odegaard or even go towards Jesus within the striker position. So when you see my forwards, I'll talk about the potential rotation options or some kind of opt-outs that you have, but I do think Saka is absolutely nailed in my draft. So when I actually look at my draft structure here for now, I do think Saka is the only player that I can easily say is absolutely nailed. All the other options, because of the amount of flexibility we have, are definitely up for change, and we will have to see the preseason, of course, with Chelsea in particular, to actually see how many minutes certain players are going to get. And as we move towards the forwards, you can actually see why I say that, because Nkunku is someone who I'm going to be lining up with for now. I just think when you add whatever amount of Bundesliga tax you want to put on this player, he still has exceptional stats, and I really think that he's undeniably a fantastic option. He could also become the penalty taker of this Chelsea team, because as we know, Havertz has left the team, so we don't actually know who the designated penalty taker is. And even Mount, for example, someone who used to take penalties, has also left the squad. So if Nkunku's on penalties, this could be extremely interesting for him. I think he could become probably even more nailed than someone like Erling Haaland at that ridiculous price of 4.0. But for now, Haaland is well someone who's absolutely locked for me within the forward positions, and so is Nkunku. The flexibility of Nkunku at 7.5 means that you can easily move towards players like Mitrovic and Darwin, or even downgrade. And that's, I think, the beauty of starting with Nkunku. You're basically tapping into a player who had fantastic statistics in previous years, very much like an Erling Haaland coming from the Bundesliga and doing incredibly well. But of course, we know players like Werner and Sancho have struggled in years past, and even Havertz, for example, the outgoing Chelsea player. So those are some things you have to weigh up, but I still have to say that Nkunku's stats, particularly from an underlying point of view, and even the actualized stats, were far superior to options like Werner and Havertz before coming into the Premier League. So I do really like Nkunku at this point in time, and I really struggle to see how he wouldn't be starting most games for Chelsea. But as things stand, of course, if we see the preseason seems to suggest that Nkunku might be prone to a little bit more rotation, I'd very happily move away from Martinelli and actually just go towards Jesus within the striker position for Arsenal, and then move towards someone like Sterling if he actually ends up being the most nailed Chelsea attacking asset as we head towards game week 1. So those are your flexible options there too. If you wanted to, let's say, move Mbeumo to Mitoma, you definitely could do that if you really wanted to back Brighton, given their strong start versus Luton. But as I said, I do think Brentford's run of games for the first 10 game weeks, or even the first 8 game weeks, is actually slightly better than Brighton. So that's kind of how I view things right now. Foden's probably the riskiest option in this team so far, just because of the minutes, and we don't really know, how long KDB's out for, what position Kovacic is going to play, and who's actually leaving to the Saudi League for this Man City team. But as things stand, I do think 3-5-2 is probably the strongest template option, and the prices are super interesting because we now have arguably the power to create as many super teams as we want, and I think that will make this season super tricky for FPL. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you guys for watching.